And ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, today is the day for TV Courtroom. And we usually do this the first Friday of each month, but last week it was the day before July 4th, so we decided to move it to today. Despite that, it's still timely. There's going to be an exam at the end of this presentation. Why? Because this presentation is important to you as an American. It's especially important to you as an African American. Why? Because it reveals and uncovers and discloses the real America. And the real America is that country that exists today only because of slavery yesterday. You might say, hey, Mike, I hear you, but isn't that hyperbole? Isn't that kind of extreme? No, it's not. And here are the facts. Slavery existed in the country that became America beginning on August 25, 1619. That's August 25, 1619. It officially ended, well, I shouldn't say officially ended, I should say kind of sort of ended on December 6, 1865 with the passage of the 13th Amendment. And the reason why I say slavery kind of sort of ended, because it really didn't. If you read the 13th Amendment, it doesn't say slavery and involuntary servitude are hereby abolished, exclamation point. It doesn't say slavery and involuntary servitude are hereby abolished, period. It says slavery and involuntary servitude are hereby abolished, comma, except following conviction of a crime. So the racists from the South and the racists from the North in Congress got together and basically let the South, the Confederacy, write the 13th Amendment. That's why it says, comma, except following conviction of a crime, because what they did is they made up crimes we know today as the Black Codes. Historically, before slavery ended, it was known as the quote unquote slave codes. But after slavery kind of sort of ended on December 6, 1865, they changed it from the so-called slave codes to the Black Codes. What are the Black Codes? The Black Codes are laws that Congress passed or that Congress allowed states to pass to criminalize Blackness. Before the 13th Amendment, you were enslaved because you were Black. After the 13th Amendment, you were enslaved because you were Black. Same thing. You might say, what do you mean? Here's how it goes. State to state to state began to pass laws known as the Black Codes. Laws like vagrancy and curfew and unemployment and just some crazy stuff. So if you didn't have a job and were outside without any visible means of support, you were a vagrant. That's a crime. Now you're charged with an offense, locked up, sentenced, and fined. Okay, what's the sentence? What's the fine? The fine could be, let's say, $50. You don't have $50, you don't have $5. So now more time is added. What's the sentence? It could be 30 days, 90 days, 1 year, 10 years, just because you were a vagrant. What about the laws regarding unemployment? If you didn't have a job, which means you didn't go back to Massa to work for him for basically quote unquote slave wages, that was a crime. Now you get fined and you go to jail. You might say, okay, Michael, if you go to jail, what happened after that? That's where convict leasing came in. So the counties and the states realized, hey, instead of locking this guy up for 30 days or for 1 year or 5 years, this Black man, this Black woman, this Black girl, this Black boy, why don't we lease those convicts to the former plantations that they worked on? There's a book by a guy named Doug Blackman. You got to read it. Douglas Blackman, a white guy, wrote a powerful tell-all book, which is called Worse Than Slavery. He makes the argument that what happened with the Black Codes after the 13th Amendment was worse than slavery. And what he wrote makes perfect sense. The best way to describe the book is this. You know how when you rent a car from a car rental agency, you don't really care about it. You rent the car and you drive over potholes and you do this and you do that because you're going to return the car anyway. So if it's a rented car, then you're not going to treat it properly. You're not going to maintain it well, because you don't have to. But if you purchase the car, now it's your car. Now you're not going to intentionally drive over potholes or have accidents, because that's your car and that's damage to your car. So slavery was purchasing Black people as if they were cars. And clearly the so-called slave master didn't take care of us because he was concerned about us. He took care of us to a limited extent to keep us working. So what does that mean? That means that they'll give you enough food to keep you alive so you can work. They'll give you enough so-called shelter to keep you alive so you could work. I want to be clear. It's not as if they were your friends. They were actually putting what they had to, the bare minimum, food and clothing, not because they cared about you, because they needed you to work. And by the way, the lifespan of enslaved people was very short. Can you imagine? You know, now today you have a job, and if it's a stressful job, you get high blood pressure, you stroke out, and you're gone. Can you imagine having a job, quote unquote job, as an enslaved human being, 24/7, 365, no breaks, no vacations, beaten, whipped, raped, sodomized? Think about that. So my point is, going back to my analogy, with slavery, the so-called slave masters, wicked, evil, demonic, had to provide just enough to keep you alive long enough to work for them. Now, once slavery kind of sort of ended with passage of the 13th Amendment of December 6, 1865, now it's no longer a quote unquote car that you're purchasing. It's now a car that you're renting. So with convict leasing, they didn't give a damn how long those Black people lived. They didn't care if their arm or leg or neck were broken, because they just replaced them with another. So when I said at the outset of this discussion that you look at America's so-called greatness today, it's the result only of enslavement yesterday. And here's the key point. Imagine that for 246 years, you had a company. And for those entire 246 years, you, as the CEO of that company, didn't have to pay your employees a dime. Well, you have a prosperous, a great company, I should say. Why? Because for 246 years, you didn't have to pay your employees a dime. So that company you got is going to be prosperous because you didn't have to pay anything to those who labor. America, the country, is that company. Because from 1619 to 1865, it's 246 years, they didn't have to pay their quote unquote employees. So America is financially great today because of the enslavement of my ancestors yesterday. And damn it, I'm never going to forget that. And they're going to have to pay, not just financially, but they're going to have to pay in terms of karma. But I digress. I just wanted to put all that in context to let you know why today I wanted to focus on the issue of the President's House Slavery Memorial. And I'm going to give you the basics. Some of you might know some of this or much of this or even all of this, but I want to make sure that those who have limited knowledge about the historic event taking place in real time here in Philadelphia, that you know exactly what's going on. So I'm going to start right now. Make sure you get your pens out, your pencils out, your pads out, because the lecture now begins. And it starts like this. Back in June of 2002, nearly a quarter century ago, that's 24 years ago, there was a newspaper article. And in that article, it indicated that the Liberty Bell Center, which back then in 2002 was at 5th and Market, was going to move one block west to 6th and Market. And the reason it was going to move is because the area where the Liberty Bell was housed at 5th and Market was too cramped and too crowded and too congested. So they needed a bigger space. So they found one a block west at 6th and Market. That's the first thing. That's 2002. The second thing, also in 2002 is that the new site of the Liberty Bell Center at 6th and Market is where America's first White House stood. Now, back then, it was known as the President's House or the Executive Mansion or the Robert Morris Mansion, but it served as America's first White House. Why? Because there was something called the 1790 Residence Act. And the 1790 Residence Act was a law passed by Congress, which basically said this: hey, we're about to start a new nation, build a new country, and we're going to make our capital in DC. But right now in 1790, DC is pretty much swampland. So we got to build it up. And while we're building it up, highways, roadways, pathways, whatever, while we're doing all that to build up DC, we're going to make Philadelphia the temporary capital. So when they chose the house at 6th and High Street, back then, High Street, well, back then, what we know today as Market Street, back then was known as High Street. So they decided, Congress did, to pick a house on the corner of 6th and High Street, now 6th and Market Street. Why? Because it was the most majestic house in Philadelphia. And if they were going to make Philly the temporary capital and house the President of the United States in that location at 6th and High Street / 6th and Market, they wanted the best house in town, and they got it. It was the Robert Morris Mansion. And if you want to know why the Robert Morris Mansion was selected to serve as America's first White House, the answer is simple. It was the most majestic house in the city. And if Congress is going to house the first president of the United States, they got to put him in a luxurious location. But here's the problem. It was called the Robert Morris Mansion because it was owned by Robert Morris. And Robert Morris agreed to lease his mansion to the federal government. I mean, it's okay, Mike, what's the problem? The problem is, how did Robert Morris, how was he able to purchase that mansion? Because he was extremely wealthy. How did he have the best house in town? Because he was extremely wealthy. How did he become extremely wealthy? Because he was a major, quote unquote, slave trader. He was involved in the slave trade. And because of that, he was able to get so much money, he was able to get the biggest house in the city. And that's why, because it was the biggest and best and most majestic house in the city, that's why the federal government decided to lease that house. And that's how that house in 1790 became America's first White House. Let me back up a little. Remember the first point I shared with you, that in June of 2002, there was a newspaper article indicating Liberty Bell Center had to move from 5th and Market to 6th and Market for bigger space. I then told you the second thing, is that that bigger space at 6th and Market is where America's first White House stood. And now the third thing, again, we found out in June of 2002, is that the new site of America's first White House is where George Washington enslaved Black men, Black women, and Black children. Now, some of us knew that George Washington enslaved 316 Black men, women, and children at his Mount Vernon, Virginia plantation. But not many of us, correction, none of us knew that he enslaved any Black people in Philadelphia at America's first White House. I was born and raised in Philly, never heard about this. I went to Masterman, arguably the best school in America, never heard about it. Went to Cheney University, the oldest HBCU, never heard about it. Went to Ohio State University for law, never heard about it. And the reason why I never heard about it at these great schools is because America hid this stuff. So I felt violated, I felt betrayed, I felt enraged. And because I was so enraged, I wanted to do something about it. But I remembered the profound words of the great James Baldwin. He stated, and I'm paraphrasing, to be Black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. That's why I was enraged. That's why I call myself today the angriest Black man in America. But here's the key. You should be enraged. You can't be Black in America and know about slavery and convict leasing and sharecropping and Jim Crow and mass incarceration and disenfranchisement and gerrymandering and redlining. You can't be Black and know about those things and not be enraged. But that rage has to be productive. It has to be constructive. It has to be strategic. And I'm going to talk about that strategy in just a second. So when I realized those three things, the move of the Liberty Bell to 6th and Market, America's first White House where George Washington enslaved my ancestors, I reached out to some of the leading activists in Philly, community activists. And we met at the office that I was in at the time under the great, and I do mean the great and preeminent and prominent Charles W. Bowser Esquire. Many of you know about Cecil B. Moore. If you know about Cecil B. Moore, you've got to know about Charles Bowser, because those two black men in the 60s and 70s and 80s, they were like the 1-2 punch for civil rights litigation here in Philadelphia. And I was blessed to be called into the office of the great Charles W. Bowser by him himself. And he taught me almost everything I know about the law. So I'm in his office, June 2002. I reach out to local activists, tell them what's going on. We come together. One of the local activists said, "Hey, Mike, let's call the group ATTACK." I'm like, "ATTACK, ATTACK. That doesn't make any sense." They said, "No, Mike, you always talk about the ancestors. You always talk about avenging the ancestors. Why don't we build up a group? Why don't we build up an organization? Why don't we build up a coalition that avenges the ancestors, and therefore call ourselves Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, ATAC, ATTACK." And the rest, as they say, is history. So we formed this group, ATTACK, and the first thing we did, remember James Baldwin about to be black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. Remember all that, because in our anger, we understood that the rage has to be strategic. So we sat down and we strategized. So the first thing we're going to do is write letters to every black elected official in Philadelphia. If you were in the city level, whether city council or the mayor and were black, you got a letter. If you were a state rep or a state senator and were black and had an office in Philly, you got a letter. If you were in Congress and were black, or if you were in Congress and you had a large black demographic, a large black constituency, and you're based in Philly, you got a letter. And the letter basically said this: "Hey, black elected official, did you know that George Washington enslaved black people here in Philadelphia at America's first White House, and nobody's doing anything about it? And on top of that, the new Liberty Bell Center is on that site at 6th and Market where George Washington enslaved black people." And I got to give credit where credit is due. The first to respond was the Honorable Mayor John Street. And maybe 3 or 4 days after we sent the letter, we get a letter from him saying, "Hey, I didn't know anything about this White House in Philly. I didn't know anything about George Washington enslaving black people in Philly. Now that I know it, I'm going to do 2 things." This is the mayor talking. "I'm going to create a group called the Mayor's Oversight Committee. I'm going to bring in some of the leading scholars and historians and professors and preservationists and tour guides and people who know about this stuff. And I'm going to include you all from ATTACK to be in this group." So he formed something called the Mayor's Oversight Committee. But he didn't stop there. He put his money where his mouth was, because he kicked in $1.5 million to jumpstart this investigation as to America's first White House. Also, big shout out to Congressman Bob Brady and Congressman Shaka Fattah, who then kicked in $3.5 million in order to expand what Mayor John Street did with his $1.5 million. So now it's on. The battle is on. You had the scholars, the historians, the intellectuals doing their thing, but you had ATTACK continuing to press and press and press and resist. This is a replica of one of our early buttons, ATTACK, ATAC, and this is one of the newer buttons we have, ATAC. By the way, for more information about ATTACK, you see the website. We have a fancy new website with bells and whistles. Just go to avengingtheancestors.com. That's avengingtheancestors.com. Right there, our producer / engineer extraordinaire, Roland, put it right up there. You see, he has the email address at the top. If you want more information, just contact us, atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. And at the bottom, our website, avengingtheancestors.com. So now that we got this political support, we become legitimate. We're like the real deal, but we made sure that we didn't get too comfortable. In other words, yeah, we do have influential political support now, but it's still a black grassroots movement. So we continue to protest and demonstrate and petition and rally and organize and meet and resist. And in the words of the great Frederick Douglass, agitate, agitate, agitate. And we kept pushing from June of 2002 until the grand opening, which took place on December 15, 2010. On that date, December 15, 2010, at noon. With the ribbon cutting, that site became the first, I repeat, the first slavery memorial of its kind on federal property in the history of the United States of America. Think about that for a second. We made history. This little angry Black revolutionary group known as ATTAC, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, we made history on December 15, 2010, when at noon on that day, with the grand opening and the ribbon cutting, that site became the first, I repeat, the first slavery memorial of its kind on federal property in the history of the United States of America. And everything was absolutely great. We're rolling with that grand opening in 2010, and millions of tourists are coming, 2011, and 12, and 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 2020. Don't stop there. We're still rolling. 2021, 2022, 2023, 24. And then something happened in January of 2025. 15 years after the 2010 grand opening. What happened in 2025? This happened in 2025. The man who we all know is a racist and a fascist, when he was sworn in for his second term in January of 2025, he issued dozens and dozens and dozens of executive orders. And every single one of those executive orders that pertained to Black people was anti-Black. They were anti-civil rights, anti-DEI, anti-critical race theory, just plain anti-Black. So we knew what was coming. That's January of 2025. Fast forward to March of 2025. The guy in the White House looks around the country and says, I'm looking at all these federal historical sites, and I don't like what I see. Basically, what he was saying, or what he meant, is that they're too damn Black, or they're too women, or they're too indigenous, or they're too whatever. Anything that didn't support white male supremacy, he didn't like. So in March of 2025, he issued an executive order, which was called, and this is complete nonsense, Restoring Truth and Sanity in American History. Think about that. If that's not Orwellian, nothing is. Where you have this governmental declaration and you name it the exact opposite of what it represents. That's the doublespeak. That's the Ministry of Truth. That's 1984. That's Big Brother. That's George Orwell. We're going to get into that later. So when he issued that order, that executive order in March of 2025, he said that he didn't like many of these federal historical sites. So again, we knew what was coming. Then we get to May of 2025. He gets what I call his hatchet man, a guy by the name of Doug Burgum. And Doug Burgum is the Interior Department Secretary. And Interior Department Secretary Doug Burgum specifically targets Philadelphia, specifically targets 6th and Market, specifically targets the President's House Slavery Memorial. And he basically says this is May of 2025. Hey, Philly, see what y'all got down there? I'm not feeling that. I don't like that. And I'm so upset about it that within the next 120 days, I could come in there and just shut that site down completely. This is May of 2025. So he gave it a 120-day deadline. That took us to September 17 of 2025, where the site could have been attacked. Well, September 17 came and went. Let me stop right there and back up. Prior to that September 17 deadline, my group, ATTAC, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, we wrote a letter to the Independence National Historical Park, the local office. We wrote a letter to the National Park Service, the regional or statewide office. And we also included a copy to the Interior Department, Doug Burgum. And that letter basically said, hey, you know, we're reading all these news reports from reputable news agencies, media outlets, and they're telling us that you all are going to take some action against the site. We believe what these major reputable media outlets are saying, but we want to hear it directly from you, federal government. So you tell us, what are you planning to do within 120 days of your May Interior Department directive? And that 120 days took us to September 17. So we wrote our letter a week before September 10, and we emailed the letter. We postal mailed the letter. We messenger delivered the letter, and we also emailed. So we made, and we followed with phone calls. So just so we're clear, we emailed it, we postal mailed it, we messenger delivered it, and we called, repeated several numbers to confirm their receipt. They completely ignored us. Remember, that's September 10, realizing that September 17 deadline was a week away. So, you know, a wise person once said, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. The TAC had been ready for like about a quarter century. We were ready in June of 2002 when we fought the good fight, when we began fighting the good fight. So by the time we're in May of 2025, we're ready to go. I mean, nobody really wants to fight, but you got to be prepared to fight. So we were ready, we were prepared. So September 17 comes and goes, but here's the interesting thing. Before that September 17 deadline actually happened, something really promising and optimistic and actually surprising happened. Remember, ATTACK is a small Black grassroots organization. Well, when the guy in the White House threatened to shut down the site, beginning with his veiled threat in March of 2025 and his Interior Department Secretary Doug Burgum's actual threat in May of 2025, we knew what was coming. So we began to rally and protest in May. We were having rallies and protests and demonstrations at 6th and Market just to let folks know what was going on. And here's the interesting thing that happened. ATTACK as a small Black grassroots coalition began to expand. We found white folks joining with Black folks. We found Jewish folks working with Muslim folks. We found old folks working with young folks. We found gay folks working with straight folks. We found rich folks working with Black folks. We found white collar folks working with blue collar folks. It was a cross section. Great example right here. Many of you know who Sam Katz is, a leading Republican in Philadelphia who at least twice ran for mayor as a Republican. He and I see eye to eye on this. We stand shoulder to shoulder. We don't have to agree politically on anything other than this. We understand and believe that when you talk about American history, you got to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So if somebody, as some bodies, as disparate politically as Sam Katz and Pan-African Socialist Revolutionary Michael Cord can come together on an issue, that frightens the people in the White House. But it wasn't just me and Sam Katz. There's a great attorney by the name of George Pachetto. George and I, if there are 100 political issues in a bag, George and I probably disagree on 97 or 98 or maybe 99 of them. But the one issue we agree on is, hey, you can't mess with real American history that tells the undisclosed truth. And that's what 6th and Market does. It's real American history that tells the undisclosed truth that explains why Black people are there and the plight that they're in. Black people are at the bottom of almost everything. Employment, bottom. Education, bottom. Home ownership, bottom. Healthcare, bottom. There's one of two reasons why we're at the bottom. One, because we're dumb and genetically predisposed to be at the bottom. Okay, that's an argument. But the more rational and intelligent is that it's a result of societal implications. That we were enslaved, and then we were sharecropped, and then we were convict leased, then we were Jim Crow. Black folks didn't really get their foot in the door until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. You do the math. That's about 60 years ago. That's the lifetime of many people today. So Black folks didn't get their foot in the door, kind of, sort of, until about 60 years ago. The lifetime of many people around to this day, whereas white folks got the jump since 1619. So They got 400 years under their belt. We got about 60. And remember what I said about the Voting Rights Act of 65 and the Civil Rights Act of 64? That didn't change everything for us. In fact, we're still fighting in regard to the Voting Rights Act. The U.S. Supreme Court, over the last 3 or 4 years, has chopped away and chipped away at the Voting Rights Act in 2023 and 2024 and 2025 and in 2026, that what it meant in 65, the Voting Rights Act, and what the Civil Rights Act meant in 1964, in 2026, doesn't really mean any of that. So not only are Black people not progressing, we're actually regressing because of racism in America. So understanding all of this, and remember what I said, 2002, we fought the good fight till 2010 and won. And then in 2025, the guy in the White House in January says some stuff, in March says some stuff, and then in May has his guy make threats. But because Americans, Black, white, and otherwise, began to come together in opposition to the guy in the White House. I mean, even Republicans say, come on, Mr. President, you know, there's got to be a line you won't cross in regard to racism. And the president says, no, there is no line. Whatever I want to do, I will do, even if it means being endorsed by David Duke, the former Grand Dragon of the KKK, even if it's saying that Nazis are fine people. So that's the mindset here. You know, we got our problems with Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon and George Bush 1 and 2, but at least there was a line they wouldn't cross. This guy today has no line, has no filter, would do anything blatantly racist. He'll do it. So remember, we got up to May of 2025 when the Interior Department Secretary gave it a 120-day deadline, which took us to September 17. But ATTACK began to organize and protest and demonstrate against that well before that September 17 deadline. So September 17 comes and goes, nothing happened. October 17, nothing. November 17, nothing happened. December 17, nothing happens. January 17, nothing happens. Then all of a sudden, on Thursday, January 22, 2026, at about 2:53 p.m., vandals dispatched by the president came to 6th and Market and completely desecrated the site. The site is just amazing from an architectural standpoint. It has the front of it, the facade is the same setup as what it looked like in 1790. And then you have what we call a vitrine, a glass enclosure where you can look down into 1790 and see the passageway leading from the kitchen area to the dining room area. That you can see. You can look down and see 1790. If you look at what's on the screen now, you'll see that image with those 9 names. If you go past that image, that gray wall, you see this glass enclosure. You can look down and literally see 1790. You got 5 TV monitors that have reenactors that play the roles of those 9 you just saw and of George Washington and Martha Washington. You got that wall there with those 9 names, but the essence, the heart, the soul of that fantastic site were the interpretive panels. What's an interpretive panel? An interpretive panel is just an information on a permanent board that explains what you're looking at. So these 34 interpretive panels told you everything about slavery in Philadelphia, told you everything about George Washington and slavery, told you everything you needed to know, those 34 panels. But on January 22, 2026, a Thursday, at about 2:53 p.m., those vandals dispatched by the president came and ripped the heart and ripped the soul and ripped the spirit, the blood, sweat, and tears from that site by ripping off all 34 panels. Okay, what next? Well, here's what's next. I got about 20 minutes left, so I want to get it all in. Even though when I talk about this kind of stuff, I start by talking about the problem, but I can't end it unless I talk about the solution. So I'm going to save the last 4 or 5 minutes for the solution. Let's continue now with the problem. So this happened January 22, 2026. 4 days later, well, even before the 4 days later, which would take us to January 30, big shout out to the city of Philadelphia. Big shout out to the city of Philadelphia Law Department. But extra big shout out to Madam Mayor Sherelle Parker, because she had the city lawyers to immediately, within hours of that approximately 3 p.m. desecration by the federal government on January 22, within a few hours, 3 or 4 hours, the city had filed in federal district court for a preliminary injunction. And that's just a big legal word. By the way, over my right shoulder, you see a poster of Malcolm X. And Brother Malcolm would always say, when you're talking to people, quote, make it plain, unquote. So I'm not going to talk like some big time highfalutin attorney who's speaking at some Ivy League institution to fellow attorneys. No, I'm going to talk to my people, and that's Brother Malcolm, and I'm going to make it plain. So the city filed this for this preliminary injunction about 3 or 4 hours after the desecration by the federal government. And again, big shout out to Madam Mayor Sherelle Parker, who was on it. And a preliminary injunction basically is a request to ask a judge to order somebody to do something or to order somebody to stop doing something. So essentially, the preliminary injunction from the city was asking the judge, hey, judge, would you order the federal government to stop taking stuff off of that site at 6th and Market and order them to put back the stuff they already removed? So they did that. My group, ATTAC, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, we stepped up along with another powerful group called the Black Journey. If you want to know what the Black Journey is, first of all, just Google it. There's a young sister by the name of Raina Yancey, Esquire, an attorney who leads that group. And the best way to describe the Black Journey is Black historians, Black scholars, Black intellectuals that do African-American tours in and around Independence Mall. Because you know there's going to be a bunch of white folks talking about Ben Franklin and all that other kind of stuff, which is okay. But the Black Journey focuses on Black folks and Black history around that time. So ATTAC, along with the Black Journey, joined forces. And we got, when you got it right there, I tell you, our producer extraordinaire, Roland, got it right there. For more information, go to blackjourneyphiladelphia.com. Powerful group. If you want to know the history of Black folks in Philadelphia, reach out to Black Journey and the leader of its group, attorney Raina Yancey. So ATTAC and Michael Cord, the Black Journey and Raina Yancey came together, and we have arguably the real dream team. I know people talked about that stuff at OT, but we got the real dream team. We're headed by Professor Kara McClellan, Esquire, a professor of law at University of Penn leading us. We got the NAACP legal defense firm. We got another group. So let me just back up. So we got Professor Kara McClellan, Esquire, University of Penn Law School. We got the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And we have a big white collar law firm that's also assisting us. At a certain point, we want to disclose everything about them, what they're doing. But we got a true dream team, some great attorneys as a legal army for ATTAC and the Black Journey. So we joined in as what they call friends of the court. So amicus curiae is the Latin legal term, but it simply means friends of the court. So if there's a legal issue and you support it, you can join in or seek to join in as amici. Or if you oppose it, you can seek to join in as amici. So we wanted our 2 cents to be added, but it wasn't just our 2 cents. It was our $200, because we not only supported the city's great argument, again, big shout out to Madam Mayor Sherelle Parker, because the city's law department seized in on a key issue here, something called the Administrative Procedures Act. And that was passed by Congress back in 1946. And again, Malcolm's whispering to me, hey, Mike, make it plain. Tell them really what the 1946 Administrative Procedures Act is. Well, basically, it's a contract. But it's much more than a contract. Why? And I want to be clear here. It's not just a contract, which means an agreement between the party. It's a federal law. So you can't minimize by saying, oh, this is a minor contractual issue. No, it's a major statutory issue. It's a major legal issue. Because with that 1946 statute, that 1946 law, that 1946 Administrative Procedures Act, it basically said this: hey, when the federal government and the city government together manage or supervise a certain area, that neither side can take unilateral or arbitrary action against the site. So if the city wants to do something with Sixth and Market, they got to meet and discuss with the federal government. And if the federal government wants to do something with the site, they got to meet and discuss with the city. Well, the federal government didn't do that. They blindsided the city on Thursday, January 22 at about 2:53 p.m. in 2026 at Sixth and Market, like they blindsided everybody. So that was a blatant violation, as the city argued, of the 1946 Administrative Procedures Act. So when we attack ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, along with Raina Yancey's The Black Journey, when we joined in as amici, we say, great city, we support you on that. But then we began to deal with the 10,000-pound elephant in the room, because we went beyond that statute to talk about race, talk about racism, and to talk about slavery. So that expanded the argument. And with the great legal arguments of the city and the great legal arguments of attack and the Black Journey through our legal team, we went into federal court about a week later after the vandalism on January 22nd. So we're in the federal district court on January 30. And we're before a white, female, Republican appointed federal district judge by the name of Cynthia Ruth. And Cynthia Ruth is known by everybody, Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, as a straight shooter who's also a scholar on the bench. So she heard the case and she was absolutely outraged by the arguments of the federal government. And the argument of the federal government was basically this: we own the site, we can do anything we want to it. And the judge basically was saying, well, let's say hypothetically, because the judge is not conceding, but the judge basically saying, hey, and this is at the oral argument we had on January 3rd. The judge basically saying to the federal government's attorneys, let's say hypothetically that the federal government owns the site. Let's say hypothetically the federal government can do with the site whatever it wants. Is the federal government saying that what the city of Philadelphia has at Sixth and Market is historically wrong, historically inaccurate, just made up stuff? And the federal government couldn't say that the information there was wrong. So the judge is basically saying this: these are my words, not hers. If you agree that the information about slavery at that site, if you agree that George Washington did enslave Black people at that site, if you agree that that served as America's first White House, even if you had the authority to erase all the stuff, why would you want to? And that was a great question. So on President's Day, which was February 16th, but I need to mention something before I jump from the January 30 district court hearing to the February 16th federal court ruling. That oral argument took place on a Friday, January 30. During that oral argument, the judge said, well, what's up with these 34 panels? Like, where are they? And what condition are they in? The first question was, where are the panels now? Since you took them since the federal government took them from Sixth and Market, where are they? And it was just weird, the response from the attorneys for the government. They said the 34 panels are on the grounds of the National Constitution Center. I need to repeat that and say it slowly. When the judge asked the federal government, where are the 34 panels? The response was, they were kind of hemming and hawing. And finally they said, well, the 34 interpretive panels are on the grounds of the National Constitution Center. If you know Center City, you know that's there, that's Fifth and Arch. The judge is like, on the grounds? Do you mean inside? Do you mean on the sidewalk? What do you mean on the grounds? And again, it was like pulling teeth to get the federal government attorneys to say what they meant. We all found out in the courtroom that what they meant is this, and none of us knew this, that the federal government owns some land on the grounds of the National Constitution Center. So even though you go to Fifth and Arch and you see it, you assume that that entire area from 5th Street to 6th Street, from Arch to Race is owned by the National Constitution Center. No, much of it is, most of it is, but there's an area on those grounds owned by the federal government. We found out that's where the 34 panels are. Now, this is where I have to be careful, because the judge allowed a number of us, including myself, to join her to go to exactly where those 34 panels were. It was a secret location, because of my utmost respect for the judge, I am not going to tell anybody where we went, but we went somewhere, and we saw the 34 interpretive panels. And I got to tell you, folks, I was absolutely effing outraged when I saw them. Why? Because, and I can say this, the best way to describe where they were is Uncle Joe's garage. Could you imagine something as important to white America, let's say the Liberty Bell, and taking that Liberty Bell and throwing it in Uncle Joe's garage? Well, that's what they did with those 34 panels. When I saw them, I'm like, why are they just like laying on the cement floor? Why are they just leaning up against the cement wall? How come there's no bubble wrap? How come there's no cardboard? How come there's no paper? How come there's nothing protecting them? And as the attorneys are picking them up one at a time to show us, I'm like, if there are 34 panels, approximately 14 of them are ceramic / glass, and they're just picking up the stuff. And I'm like, but if you slip or bump into something and drop them, they'll be destroyed forever. Now, I got to be honest. I can't say that any of the 34 at that site, in terms of their condition, were destroyed. I can't say that. I can't even say that they were damaged. But I will say that there were some scratches and some blemishes and some scrapes. And even though it wasn't damaged or destroyed, let's go back to my analogy. You can take the Liberty Bell itself and put it in Uncle Joe's or Uncle Bob's or Aunt Mary's garage, and there's no damage to it, but damn it, it's the Liberty Bell. Why would you put it in Uncle Joe's garage? That's desecration. The same thing applies to what took place with those 34 panels. And the reason why I use desecration is on purpose. It's intentional. If you have hallowed ground, and 6th and Market is historic hallowed ground, because that's where America's first White House was, and that's where George Washington enslaved Black men, women, and children. If that's historic hallowed ground, and it is, and you vandalize that historic hallowed ground, you engage in desecration. That's why I call it desecration. So we had the argument on Friday, January 30. We had the inspection of the 34 on that Monday, February 2nd, and then 2 weeks later on President's Day. That takes us to February 16. Every year since 2002, actually every year since 2003, because the TAC was founded in June of 2002, our first public demonstration was July 4, 2002. And we had other events that took place, but in the next year, February, that would have been February of 2003, we had our first President's Day event, not to celebrate George Washington or any American president, but to use that day to enlighten people about the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about that site. So that would have been on February 16, 2026, would have been the 23rd annual event by TAC. And exactly 2:05 p.m., while TAC is doing its rally thing at 6th and Market on that Monday, February 16, we get word from our attorneys that the judge right across the street in the federal courthouse, Republican appointed judge, District Court Judge Cynthia Root, ruled in our favor and in the city's favor, and ordered the Trump administration to immediately, and I do mean immediately, restore the 34 panels. That's February 16. But then some stuff happened in between, and the National Park Service / Interior Department under the Trump administration filed an appeal and sought a stay of execution to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. That's how it works on the federal level. You have the trial level district court, you have the Circuit Courts of Appeal, and you have the U.S. Supreme Court. So after we won in the federal district court with a Republican judge, they appealed to the Third Circuit. But they still had to start restoring the 34. And they got 16 of the 34 up. And then the Third Circuit said, okay, time out. You got the 16 up based on the order from Federal District Court Judge Cynthia Ruth. Stop with the 16. There are 18 remaining. We don't know what we're going to order you all to do with those remaining 18 until we have an oral argument. And we go back and forth to find out, should Judge Cynthia Ruth's order be upheld or should it be reversed? And remember, her order was on President's Day, February 16, 2026. Fast forward to June 12 of 2026. A Massachusetts federal district court judge in a case involving historical sites in Massachusetts not only ruled that the federal government cannot censor, whitewash, desecrate those sites in Massachusetts, but that Massachusetts district court judge also said that the federal government can't do it nationwide, including in Philadelphia. And many people assume that that means that not only did they win in Massachusetts, which by the way is the First Circuit, but we also win in Philadelphia. There's some convoluted legal stuff that we don't have time to go into. Long story short, remember that's June 12th. Let me jump to 6 days later, which would have been June 18th. And remember that Massachusetts case, that's from the First Circuit. We in Philadelphia, we in Pennsylvania are in the Third Circuit. The Third Circuit, the day before Juneteenth, that would have been June 18, 2026, the Third Circuit dealt us a major blow. They dealt us a setback where they basically said, hey, the guy in the White House, if he wants to shut down the site at 60th Market, he can do it. And then a couple of weeks later, on July 2nd, the First Circuit Court of Appeals in Massachusetts basically dealt a setback to the Massachusetts District Court. So that's on July 2nd. Here in Philadelphia, the Interior Department, remember it's the Trump administration, the Interior Department, the National Park Service, Independence National Historical Park. On Thursday, July 2nd, the Interior Department saw a mandate. A mandate basically says this: hey, Third Circuit, we won on June 18th. And now we want you to order the district court to do what the district court should have done in the very beginning and allow us to basically, if we want to, destroy those 34 panels and put our new stuff up. That was Thursday, July 2nd. The next day, Friday, July 3rd, the Third Circuit granted the Trump administration's request for a mandate. But the city of Philadelphia came back and said, hold it, time out. How can you, on a holiday, which would have been July 3rd, how can you, Third Circuit, grant the request made by the Trump administration on July 2nd without giving us a chance to respond? Because we have at least 10 days to respond and at least 45 days to request a rehearing. That was filed by the city on July 4th, e-file. Interesting thing is that the Third Circuit then said, okay, we are going to allow you to argue about the mandate, but we're going to deny your reconsideration. In other words, you lose, City of Philadelphia, you lose attack, you lose the Black journey. But in regards to that mandate issue, yeah, I guess the point you make about the 10 days and the 45 days, that makes sense. So we're going to give you some time. That was on July 6th. Let's go to the next day, which has been Tuesday, July 7th, where the city filed a powerful memo, brief, explaining why the mandate should not issue. So I say all that to say this: the case is right now in legal limbo. And to make it a bit clearer, if you lose in the Third Circuit, and I don't want to say we lost because the fight is not over, but when we got that setback, we still had options legally and still have options legally. Once a 3-judge panel rules against you, you can go back to that 3-judge panel and ask for reconsideration. If they deny it, you can go to the 14-member full panel. Well, it's not a panel, it's actually full court. So I want to be clear. You got a 3-judge panel, 3 members from the Third Circuit of the 14. You got 3 who ruled against us. Once they do that, you can ask that 3-member panel for reconsideration. If they don't do it, you ask for what they call an en banc hearing, which means a full court hearing with all 14 asking for a reversal. If that doesn't work, theoretically, if you want to, you can seek what they call petition for certiorari, for a hearing with the Supreme Court. Politically, that's not a smart move to make, and wouldn't you consider that? And then there's a 4th option. The 4th option is you can come back with a completely new lawsuit based on completely new legal theories. That's the 4th option. And to be quite candid, there are other options, at least 5. So among those 5 options I mentioned, we still can do whatever needs to be done. Don't feel like we lost, because we didn't. We were in the ring. It's a 15-round fight. We might be, let's say, round 10, round 11. And yeah, we got a busted lip, and yeah, we got a bloody nose, but we're still fighting. My mentor, the great Charles Bowser, used to say, hey, Mike, how was court today? And I would say, fighting the good fights and winning most of them. He says, fighting the good fight is wonderful. Winning the good fight is perfect. And we plan to win. In my final minute or two, let me say this. The reason why we're going to win is because we took a page from our elders and ancestors engaged in the civil rights battle of the 50s and 60s. They had a great strategy. It goes like this. They sent activists out into the streets to raise hell. They sent attorneys into the courtrooms to raise issues. So if you don't win in the court of law, you will win in the court of public opinion. Let me wrap this up by saying, folks, we meet, Attack does, the first Monday of each month. So if you want to be on the list to get the link, the Zoom link to join our online monthly meeting, reach out to us at atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. Our producer/engineer Roland, extraordinaire producer and engineer Roland, has it on the screen, atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. Email us and we'll send you the link, and you can join us at our meetings, which take place the first Monday of each month. Or for more information about Attack and all the stuff I'm telling you about, go to our website, avengingtheancestors.com. That's avengingtheancestors.com. What we're dealing with now in this battle is the most important political/cultural issue affecting African Americans today. Why? Because we know that the Trump administration is a fascist administration. And what fascists try to do is this. They try to create a new future by destroying an old past. And how do you destroy an old past? You do it like Big Brother did in 1984. You create a ministry of truth. And the job of the ministry of truth is to make the lie the truth and the truth a lie. But in the same way that Republican appointed Judge Cynthia Ruth said, no Big Brother here in America, we say no Big Brother in America. Contact us, join us, fight the good fight. I'm going to end today's show like I end every show. It goes like this. Think Black. I'm out.